right, so let's just start with some really basic terms to describe data. A data set contains information about a group of individuals or cases. So cases is what we call the individuals in the data set. I swear it's just a coincidence that the very first vocabulary word is my own name. And then the characteristics that we measure on each case, those are called variables. So we'll talk about a couple different kinds. A categorical variable is one that places the cases into one of several groups or categories. So for example, if I ask you what class year are you in, so freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, that's putting you into categories. So that's a categorical variable. A quantitative variable, it's kind of what it sounds like. Every case is going to be given a numerical value. So if I ask you what is your height, that's a quantitative variable. And notice that there's this little qualifier here, numerical values for which it makes sense to find an average. So that's excluding numbers like zip code, where really the purpose is to put people into categories, and it doesn't make any sense to say what's the average zip code in this class. The last one we'll talk about is an identifier. So this isn't really a variable to be analyzed. This is something that's just identifying the individuals or items in the data set. So an example of this would be your 811 number, right? That number is unique to you, so it's not putting you in a category. It's just a numerical label that we can use for UGA students. So let's look at an example real quick. So this is taken from a data set that contains all the data for flights departing New York City in 2013. So obviously this is a huge data set, over 300,000 observations. It also includes 19 variables, but we're just going to look at a few here. Okay, so every row in this data set is going to be a case. And that's usually how data sets are set up. Each row is a case. And in this situation, the individual cases are the flights, right? We're recording information about the flights. And sometimes if you're having a hard time identifying the cases, look and see what the variables are and then see what they're describing. So delay, carrier, airtime, all of these things are describing the flights. Okay, so each row is a case and then each column is a variable. Again, this is a pretty straightforward, pretty typical way to organize a data set. Okay, so if we look at the variables that are here, the amount of the delay, that's given as a number, so that's going to be a quantitative variable. The carrier, that's like UA, I think is United Airlines, American Airlines, that's a category. So is origin, these are airport codes. So these are both categorical variables. Right, so they're putting the flights into categories based on the carrier or where the flight came from. Airtime, distance, these again are quantitative variables. So this data set is what's called a cross-sectional data set. That means that the data were collected all at one point in time. We're not trying to look and see how things changed in New York City flights. We're just looking at 2013. In contrast, if we were to look at the same individual being measured repeatedly over time, that's called time series data. So here I have, this is looking at the stock prices for Delta. And so you can see kind of how this is set up. For every day, we're going to be looking at the stock price, seeing how it changes over time. So like Friday, July 31st, the price was $24.97. The next day that was a market day, July 31st is a Friday, so that next Monday the price was $25.20 and so on. We're looking to see how the prices change over time. Okay, so those are some of the basic terms that we use to describe data sets.